What's up, people? My name is Shaggy, the opinionated hippie. Started this channel to discuss all things Frank Zappa. Today, through the magic of Chester Thompson, from my favorite Frank Zappa drummer. Chester Thompson played with Frank in 73 and 74, appeared on a couple albums, including the all-time classic, One Size Fits All. He eventually quit Zappa's band, and eventually, when Peter Gabriel quit Genesis, Bill Bruford became sort of their touring drummer for a short while, and then Chester Thompson permanently became their touring drummer. So that is the connection between Zappa and Genesis, among others. But today I'm just going to rank and review the Genesis albums according to my favorites. Don't think there's many surprises in here. Maybe when we get to the top, people would move things around, but I have a feeling this is a pretty normal list. I was fortunate enough to see Genesis a handful of times in the 80s. I saw them on the Mama tour, which was the Genesis album tour. Saw them on the Invisible Touch tour, and I pretty much gave up after that. Phil Collins' stage presence, mainly sort of just the energy he gives and the amount of talking he did, and like the sort of pre-written speeches that he would give before songs, were definitely not my thing. As much as I liked their live shows, loved the medleys, loved the way they sort of worked old songs in, and like they knew they didn't have enough time to play everything, so they would do snippets of things live. I eventually sort of just checked out after the Invisible Touch and didn't ever go back to really revisit their albums. Like every time one came out, I would listen to it, but other than recently, I have not listened to their last 3 albums in forever. Did revisit them to see if they were as not memorable as I remember them being, and they are not as memorable as I remember them being. Interestingly enough, my stepfather works in the music business and does music and movies, and he's good friends with Leland Sklar, the bearded bass player in all of Phil Collins' videos. Wonderful guy, really nice man. But I got to go see Phil Collins a lot because of that connection. I've seen Collins a lot. He is a great showman, but it is just not my style, not my vibe. But anyways, that's enough about me. Let's get on to talking about Genesis. There are 15 studio albums, only doing the studio ones, though maybe I'll do a separate video. All their live albums, I think, are great. Genesis Live, Peter Gabriel Years, phenomenal. Seconds Out, the Steve Hackett, excellent. 3 Sides Live, excellent. Even if you get the one that has 4 sides live, excellent. Great albums. Don't really know about the ones after that. I've listened to them, but I can't vouch for them as much. But anyways, good live albums. Again, they don't do much with their material other than play it well, but there's some interesting melodies, some medleys, some interesting moments on each of those. But anyways, yeah, let's get on to number 15. There will not be a surprise at 15. 15. Number 15, Calling All Stations. This came out in 97. It does not feature Phil Collins. It features Ray Wilson, a singer from Scotland. Doesn't even sound like Genesis. Yeah, Phil's not there, but the sound just, it doesn't sound good. It's very stiff. It sounds very produced and like just over like tweaked in the studio. For some strange reason, even though this was like, came out in 97, it's almost as if the previous decade never happened. The songs all sound like kind of FM radio staples from the 80s, but not even that, because I don't think they're memorable enough or have enough hooks to be played on the radio. There are moments throughout the album on a couple songs where like we'll get like a verse, chorus, and then there'll be like a bridge. And a lot of those, or a couple of those bridges have like, oh, this sounds like Genesis. There's like a Tony Banks keyboard moment, and you kind of get that like Phil Collins-esque. The thing I want to compare it to is in the song No Reply at All off the Abacab album. You get this little weird bridge breakdown where things get a little bit softer and the keyboards kind of come in. That moment, that feeling that evokes, that happens a couple times on here, but in each of the instances, it lasts for like 20 seconds, and then Wilson sings, and you're like, oh, okay, it doesn't sound like Genesis anymore. Collins replacing Gabriel and succeeding was an accomplishment. Why they thought they could do it again after decades is beyond me. Collins made sense. He was the drummer. He was in the band. He had sung on Gabriel albums, right? We knew he could sing. Why they thought this would work, I don't know. I just don't think there's anything memorable on here. Songs aren't any good. Like I just can't. I think I've listened to this album twice now in my life. I will not listen to it again. So if you like it, tell me what songs I should check out, why I should give it another chance. But it's just a forgettable album. And if it didn't have the name Genesis on it, I don't think you would ever think it was Genesis. Number 15, Calling All Stations. Number 14, We Can't Dance, 1991, Phil Collins' last studio effort. Why they thought this material was strong enough to justify a double album is beyond me, though the rest of the world loved it. This was a huge album. Um, yeah, it's a double album of songs that all kind of have the exact same tempo and ballady type thing, and maybe it starts slow and there's a little thing in the middle where it maybe gets a little more interesting or proggy, but that never really goes anywhere. Um, I hate to say this, but that song "We Can't Dance," or is that what it's called? "I Can't Dance," I can't. That song, that might be the best song on here. Like, and that's a pretty bad song, but at least it stands out from the rest of them. It's kind of memorable. It's got some. They're trying to do something a little bit funkier. Way too many ballads on here. Way too many slow mid-tempo songs. Um, Not a big fan. Like, they really embrace sort of the drum machines and sort of electronic drums um, in the 80s and 90s. I don't think they were always successful. I think maybe early on in like Abacab and the Genesis album, it kind of worked. But after that, I just think it sounds dated. It sounds bad. They're not that inspired. Like, none of these songs I just think are memorable. Couple of them are upbeat. Title Dreaming While You Sleep. What kind of title is Dreaming While You Sleep? Just call it Dreaming. I'm going to assume you're asleep, right? Unless you're not, then call it Dreaming While You're Awake. And then that's interesting. What does that even mean? Like, side three, Tell Me Why, Living Forever, Hold On My Heart, just three completely forgettable songs. Side four also, I know Fading Lights was kind of popular live, but yeah, whatever. I just, I think it's a rough album. I don't understand its popularity. It is so far away from what Genesis was. And yes, bands are allowed to change and bands are allowed to evolve. I have no problem with that. But at least some of the other albums on this list have little things where they're trying to do something. It seems a little more out of the box or creative. But this just seems like, I don't know, man. Just like you're spinning your wheels to spin your wheels. And I don't get it. Don't understand this album. Tell me why I'm wrong, please, so I can go back and discover something that's maybe worth listening to on this album. But for me, it's all just kind of forgettable. Number 14, We Can't Dance. Number 13, 1987, 1986 is Invisible Touch. After this, we will stop going backwards in chronological order and we will jump backwards a little more. But I wanted to put this last only because of the existence of Invisible Touch, which sonically sounds horrible. Everything about it is horrible. The video is horrible. The fact that the tours on Mama were pretty big and pretty huge, right? I saw them in like a sports arena, like a basketball arena. The tour for Invisible Touch, they played like 8 shows at the same sports arena they played on the Abacab tour. Plus, they played a Dodger Stadium tour. Pretty sure the Dodger Stadium show sold out. I know we spent like 6 hours in the parking lot afterwards. Luckily, we were thoroughly entertained, but it was a nightmare, and I blame Invisible Touch. But I put this album above the other three because there are a couple things that are memorable. One of them is not Invisible Touch. It's not Tonight, 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 which I think they think is a little more epic than it is. Don't really like the drum machine sounds on that. Land of Confusion I can deal with. That's an okay pop number. Not that bad. In Too Deep, whatever. It's a ballad, whatever. Anything she does, I actually like. Like one of the few songs on this album that didn't get radio play, that wasn't a hit. I don't even think they ever played it live. I kind of like that song. It's a Tony Banks number. Domino, not the epic that they think it is, I think, but I think it's a little entertaining. It's kind of got a little bit of darker edge. There's like a one part, two part. I think the second part is a little bit more memorable than anything on the three albums I just discussed, or the two albums I just discussed. Throwing It All Away was a hit. And the Brazilian, an instrumental, their attempt to be a little prog, interesting. I don't like the way it sounds. Again, there's a lot of just drum sounds here I don't like. But I think there's more stuff on here that's memorable than the last two. The last two I just think are bland. At least here they're trying to be instrumentals, epic suites, longer songs that actually go somewhere and aren't just 10 minutes of like riding a treadmill, essentially. So still not an album I will ever go back and listen to again after this video is made, but a little more memorable than the two that would follow that. Number 13, Invisible Touch. Number 12, and then there were three. The first album without Steve Hackett, when there were only, count them, three. This came out in 1978. Wow, didn't realize it was that late. Thought it was more recent by a year. But anyways, I really think there were only two memorable songs on this album, maybe three. The opening, Down and Out, brings for a while sort of a heavy prog vibe that kind of bodes well for what the rest of the album could possibly be. But the rest of the album doesn't tap into that energy again. And then towards the end, the penultimate track, The Lady Lies, that has a nice flow to it, a little more upbeat, a little more just like rhythmically like propulsive. It feels like it's going somewhere. Kind of reminds me of like it was a weird comparison, like a Dire Straits number from this era. It just has that kind of momentum, not as Dire Straitsy as those type of momentum songs, but it has a little more energy than the rest of the stuff on here. But the rest of it is either ballads that I don't think go anywhere, more up-tempo numbers that don't go anywhere. Snowbound may have the worst lyrics ever about, oh, what's a snowman? Hey, there's a snowman. No, man, I'm checked out on that stuff. Just nothing memorable. They did have a hit with the closing track, Follow You, Follow Me, which I don't think is a bad song. You know, whatever. I know some people think that was the death of Genesis, was the release of that and the popularity of that. But it's way more memorable than most of the stuff on this album. So at least they're writing a pop hook that is somewhat memorable. But yeah, I look at these songs, there's nothing that grabs me. I have no interest in going back and listening to them again. Maybe Ballad of Big has a couple moments. Like there were moments in a number of songs where you're like, okay, that's a cool little vamp, or that's a cool little prog, like 30 seconds, or Tony Banks's keyboards are nice here. But none of them last for the duration of a song. And for only having three members of the band, it is a very cluttered, kind of overproduced sound. And it would have been, and I know Rutherford is on bass and he's playing guitars, and it would have been neat had it maybe a couple songs been only bass, keyboard, and drums, or they had just found a way to maybe simplify the sound so it only sounded like three people instead of like this overproduced kind of mess. I don't know. It's kind of a forgettable album, kind of blah. But there's nothing as horrible as Invisible Touch on here. Therefore, it's ranked a little bit higher. Number 12, and then there were three. Number 11, From Genesis to Revelation, which is the entirety of the Old and New Testament, right there in one album. This is their debut album. Phil Collins is not there on drums. Steve Hackett is not on guitar. You do have Banks, Rutherford, and Gabriel there, plus Anthony Phillips on guitar and backing vocals, and John Silver on most of the drums. Somebody else drummed on one track. I don't think this is a bad album. Like, I don't think there's any single tracks on here that are bad. It's just sort of uninspired kind of English folk, little psyche pop, a little proggy pop, just very of its time back in 69. Gabriel's voice still sounds like Gabriel. There are definite moments where Tony Banks's keyboard sounds is like, oh, that sounds like a Genesis song. Like you can see sort of the seeds of what they would become, the kernels of what they would become. I think there was one really good track. The second track in the beginning, I actually really like. And there were moments throughout this thing where I'm like, okay, that's kind of nice. This is not horrible. Ultimately, when I put it down, it's kind of forgettable, but I don't think any of it's bad. I definitely think it has a little more, they're trying a little bit harder, or there's a little more inspiration than on those like last albums. So it's like a good start, but like you have tiny little hints of what they will become, but there's definitely nothing here that's like full blown prog like they would eventually become. But it's a listenable album, and I don't think, especially if you're a fan of like late 60s, early 70s music, I think there's enough here to like grab onto that you can be like, oh yeah, okay, this isn't a complete wash. And even if they had not become Genesis, this might be an album they're like, I don't know, you might listen. No, I don't know. If it's not Genesis, it's probably lost. It's one of those things that's going to pop up on YouTube on like that Rarest Records channel where it's like, oh, check out this one that nobody ever heard. And you're like, it's not a bad album. And it's definitely better than the ones on this that I've already listed, just because it's just not that bad. It's just they are not yet Genesis yet. They're just a bunch of musicians trying to figure themselves out in 1969. My number 11, From Genesis to Revelation. My number 10 is the Genesis self-titled album that came out in 1983. This is when I owned Abacab. I bought this, and after I bought this, I really got into Genesis, and that's when I started kind of going back and looking for albums in like used record bins and stuff like that. And that's when I started like really sort of deep dive in my Genesis experience. Was fortunate enough to see them a number of times live on this tour, just because they played LA like 20 times, I think, over the course of this. I think they had like an 8-show run at the LA Forum or something. But this is like the first album on this list that I think is consistent. Like I think it's good that this is 10. Because like a top 10 is usually something significant, and this deserves to be in a top 10. Number of songs I actually like. I think Mama is a great opener. It was a great live opener for that concert. I love Phil's like, ha ha ha, like do something, Phil. I like that. Go out there, take chances. I think in the Phil Collins era, their biggest downfall are the ballads, because I don't think Collins does enough with his voice on any given ballad to like really distinguish it from the other ones. So he's got a decent voice, but there's not that raw emotion. There's not that thing that like differentiates these slower numbers from each other. And so in a song like Mama, when he's like, ha ha ha, and having a little more fun, good on you, do that more. And there are ballads that work, but mainly because the songwriting is so much better that his voice doesn't matter. But I like Mama. That's always a big hit. I like the keyboard sound on that do whatever, kind of a throwaway number, poppy little number, but it's not bad. Home by the Sea, Second Home by the Sea, kind of stupid lyrics. Not really sure what their point is. I mean, I know what they're about, but whatever. Really dated drum sounds on Second Home by the Sea, but it works for me mainly because I was listening to this album in 83, so I'm used to the sounds. But those are like a song, and then you kind of fade out, and then you get this really, really dramatic 80s electronic drum sound that sounds horribly dated. But then it goes into like a nice instrumental jam, a la like the end of Abacab. Maybe something you could hear at the end of like Wind in the Wuthering, or at the end of like Duke, kind of those just kind of extended type instrumental jams that just Genesis does. Nobody's really soloing. It's not that kind of jam, but it's like this pre-written jam with all these parts that I think works. The worst song they've ever done? Yeah, the worst song they've ever done. Illegal Alien opens up side 2. What's worse, Invisible Touch or Illegal Alien? They're both pretty bad. That accent that Phil does on this, I'm sorry, but it's just, I don't know, man. It's bad. Yeah, I've spent my entire life living in either Southern California or Texas, and it's just, yeah, this is a horrible song, man. I'm sorry. Like, this is a blotch. Yeah, but I'm gonna say his name. I'm still gonna say Phil Collins and all their names, even though I heavily, heavily have a problem with this song. Don't want to censor it though. Anyways, and then a bunch of kind of forgettable songs, Taking It All Too Hard, which was kind of a hit. Just a Job to Do, which is kind of an okay little pop number. Silver Rainbow, I really like. Kind of starts off slow and then gets upbeat in like the best way possible. Silver Rainbow has some good energy. I think that's a pretty good song. And then It's Gonna Get Better, which another sort of upbeat ballady type thing. So yeah, some good songs on this album. A little inconsistent, one absolutely atrocious song, but not a bad outing, and really their last okay outing before the rest of it is just, to my ears, completely forgettable. Yeah, number 10, Genesis. Number 9, Abacab. This came out in 1982, 81. This album, 81, this album was all over MTV in the early days of MTV. Abacab was played all the time. No Reply at All was played all the time. Me and Sarah Jane was played all the time. Dodo Lurker was played all the time. Man on the Corner was played all the time. I want to even say there was a video of Who Done It. The live performance that was on Three Sides Live VHS, that release. It wasn't the live performance, but it was the video of the live performance, but just with the studio track overdubbed. Pretty sure there was a video for Who Done It also. But at this point in their career, I'm literally just counting songs, like as to which album I like better. Because there's, I think, three completely forgettable songs on here. Keep It Dark, Like It or Not, kind of forgettable. Another Record's not bad. The closing song, I think, kind of a pretty good Rutherford song. But I really like the other stuff. Love Abacab. I wish it hadn't faded out at the end. I wish they had included like the entire jam that they have live, since you can hear even during the fade out. That's pretty much what they would do live. I just wish that didn't happen. No Reply at All belongs on a Phil Collins album. It's a Phil Collins song. I think it could have been on either one of his first two albums. Would have fit in perfectly. Would have been another huge hit. Probably would have been a bigger hit than it was for Genesis, even though it was kind of a big hit here. I liked him stretching out and trying to use horns. I liked him doing that, but it's a sign that they're heading in the direction that I'm not going to care about. Me and Sarah Jane, love that song. The live version on Three Sides Live is particularly good. Phil Collins' vocal performance on that is great. Dodo Lurker, I love, even though the lyrics are ridiculously crazy and kind of silly. Who Done It? Ridiculously silly, fun song. Again, more just pointlessly stupid lyrics, but they're taking chances. They're having fun. I like that song. And then Man on the Corner, which is like probably their last really good sort of ballady number that I would care about from here on out. But yeah, man, a pretty consistent album. And the stuff that is bad is the stuff that is not great is not bad. It's just kind of there. But yeah, not a bad album, I would say. Number 9, Abacab. Number 8 is 1980's Duke. This is an album that is hindered by ballads. Again, this is the three of them. This is their second album. It's just the three of them, and there are two ballads on here, which I think are just, again, Phil Collins's voice is just not bringing enough to the table, and or maybe the songwriting just isn't as good. But the Heath A's, which ends side one, I don't really care for. Alone Tonight, which is the second song on side two, is not that good. But then everything else, other than Man of Our Times, which is this over the top, heavy on the drums number that I think is just kind of forgettable. Misunderstanding is on here, another sort of pop hit that I actually like. I really like that slow, drawn out sort of like vamp, I guess, or whatever it is, that riff, that dun 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 dun. I just love that sort of long, drawn out way that thing is played. I don't have a problem with that song, but this album starts and ends with just absolutely top notch songs. Opens with Behind the Lines, which goes into Duchess, which goes into something called guide vocal. Um, and then it closes with Duke's Travels, which is like an instrumental that builds and builds and builds and goes into these different parts. And then that goes into Duke's End. And there's some lyrics towards the end of the Duke's Travels. And that whole ending is like 10 plus minutes. A phenomenal way to end the album. There's a callback to Behind the Lines at the end of it. Just great. Yeah, you got Turn It On Again is on here, which is a pretty good song. There's a sort of a song that starts off ballady, but then takes a really nice turn into a more upbeat number called Cul-de-sac. And then probably one of the best ballads as far as the melody and Phil's voice matching the lyrics, and that's Please Don't Ask, which is after Cul-de-sac. So this is a pretty strong and consistent album. A couple slow spots on mainly on side A. But yeah, I think it's a pretty consistent album. And a lot of the songs on here people are familiar with: Behind the Lines, Duchess, Misunderstanding, Turn On Again. But if you have not heard the album, I would definitely recommend you check out mainly like almost all of side two, or maybe from Cul-de-sac on. I think it's a pretty solid run of music for this album. Definitely a huge step in the right direction after And Then There Were Three. But unfortunately, they would then kind of go back towards more standard pop rock stuff on Abacab and then on. But probably their last consistently strong, highly rated album. And I think, yeah, after this, it's all either Hackett stuff or Gabriel stuff. So this is the highest rank of the threesome albums. Number 8, Duke. Number 7, 1976's Wind in the Wuthering, the second album they released in 1976. This is Hackett's last album. I do I am not as big of a fan of this album as I think a lot of other people are. There are some excellent tracks on here, some pretty good tracks, and then a couple just maybe one really bad clunker, and then a couple things which I don't think are generally as good as maybe other people think they are. Side one opens up with 11th Earl of Mar, which is kind of a longer, slightly proggy number, which I just don't think works. I just don't like the melody that's in this. I don't like just the song. It just doesn't do anything for me. One for the Vine I do like. I do think maybe it's a little long before they get to the epic sort of what I like to consider like a Euro pop dance jam that you might hear at like a Bonnaroo musical festival at midnight, like anytime in like around 2010. It has an over the top, like I could see like who, I don't want to say Skrillex, but who are those other guys that were huge back then? Just dropping a jam like this in the middle of a set. It just has this over the top, just European dance synth vibe that is phenomenal. One for the Vine does. Your Own Special Way, bad ballad. Not a fan of that song. Does nothing for me. What Gorilla, an interesting little instrumental. All in a Mouse's Night has some good things. It has some good sort of upbeat tempo in it. Blood on the Rooftops, a ballad, but a more acoustic guitar ballad instead of a piano, which I think works better. Again, Hackett would leave after this, so I think the dominance of the piano ballads afterwards makes sense. And then the absolutely phenomenal, the last 11 minutes of this album, which are just like Genesis at their instrumental prog best, going into an absolutely perfect ballad. Unquiet Slumbers for the Sleepers, In That Quiet Earth, and then Afterglow. One of those instrumentals that starts off like all moody with a lot of cymbal work, and then it goes into a more like direct guitar line where you get like a melody, and then you get some dun dun dun, some heavy like rock sort of riffing that goes on, and then eventually that kind of just melts away into Afterglow, which is just such a phenomenal song and such a great ballad, and one of the best things Tony Banks wrote. Two of Banks' best songs ever, Afterglow and One for the Vine, are on this. And so this is really a win for Banks, which I think from what my understanding is, the Banks Hackett friction is what eventually forced Hackett out. Banks was sort of a autocrat of sorts, from what I know, but I've never read books about Genesis, so that's just stuff I've picked up here and there. But anyways, this is a pretty solid, pretty consistent album. Um, I do think side is weaker than side B, and it doesn't quite grab me as much. But there were some definite highs on this album and some definite things worth checking out, especially I would say All Aside 2. All Aside 2 is a pretty good listen and culminates in an almost absolutely perfect run of 3 songs. But yeah, that would be my, what is this? My number 7, Wind and Wuthering. Number 6 is 1970's Trespass, their second album. Still no Collins or Hackett. You have Philip still on guitar, and you have a new drummer, Mayhew. This is the only album he would appear on drums. And this is just, they're definitely leaning towards where they would become. You can hear that definitely on songs like Stagnation, an absolutely beautiful song with one of the best sort of endings of any song. The ending of this is very kind of predicts what will happen by the end of Supper's Ready, where you just get these huge, magnificent sort of Tony Banks movements that just are uplifting and provide just such a neat sort of like coda to a musical journey that takes place over the course of a song. Opening Looking for Someone is a really good prog number that its only failure, and this is their second album, and you can see like maybe it's like inexperience of the band, is it's a really great 7-minute journey. Really good sort of prog elements, a little just rock, straight, just a really good song. But then the end has this sort of over the top, bombastic, theatrical ending, prog ending that just doesn't belong with the rest of the song. It's almost like it's like we got to find a way to end this, so let's tack on this ending, and that kind of ruins what is otherwise a really good song. And then the rest of the album is just phenomenal. White Mountain, Visions of Angels, Stagnation opens up side 2, great song, Dusk, and then the absolutely phenomenal High Energy, a song they would, I think, encored with shows. I think they brought it back for a while in like the late 70s after Gabriel had left the band. The Knife, which is a song that should be called The Knife because it feels kind of like The Knife. The good title for this song. Good, describes the energy that this song's going to cut you, people. This song's going to cut you. But yeah, just a really good, I love the energy of this album. You can see they're definitely a big step forward from where they were on From Genesis to Revelation. And you can see how they are going to make a further step on their next album. And you can sort of see that it's a logical transition. But yeah, possibly an underrated album, but I think it's really good. And even if it kind of fails, it just kind of fails because it's might be a little dated. This band is still kind of trying to find its way, but I think it's engaging enough to not ever be boring. Number 6, Trespass. Number 5 is 1971's Nursery Cryme. Hackett and Collins have now joined the band, so you have the Genesis lineup that would stick around for 3 more albums after this. You can definitely see sort of the evolution in their music in the opening track, The Musical Box, and the closing track, Fountain of Salmakis, which I think are just 2 of their like early sort of best examples of some of their epic, not the best example, obviously, but good examples of sort of their epic prog mixed with like whatever it is Peter Gabriel does, a little all over the map with some kind of crazy convoluted time signatures, but at the same time some incredibly memorable sort of just melodies and performances. Those start, and those are the first and last tracks on the album. You get like a tiny little like short little For Absent Friends number, The Return of the Giant Hogweed, which is another one of those kind of convoluted prog numbers that Genesis did. I think this is the least effective thing on this album. And then side B, Seven Stones, you get a nice kind of a little more poppy, funky, fun Harold the Barrel, Harlequin, and then you close out with just a phenomenal Fountain of Salmakis, which you can hear a live version of on 3 Sides Live if you get the 4 Sides Live version of 3 Sides Live. 3 Sides Live came out, and I think there was a release in Europe that didn't have, like, the release I got had 3 Sides Live, and then the 4th side was 5 other songs, I think. Paper Late, Me and Virgil, which phenomenal song, plus 3 songs whose name I can't remember off the top of my head. But that was an interesting little thing. But if you got the version that had the fourth side live, there was a live version of Fountain of Salmacis on it, which was really good. Plus a version of Watcher of the Skies into It, plus a version of One for the Vine. But anyways, yeah, this is just, you can tell the songwriting is just a little more solid. They're definitely, with the addition of Hackett and Collins, they definitely have more of the identity of who they would become on this album. But I would say that for sure the standout tracks are the opening musical box and the closing Fountain of Salmacis. But for the most part, it's an enjoyable, consistent, strong listen from start to finish. But very much has that early prog sound that they kind of almost grow out of after this. After this, I think everything they do is a little more streamlined and not as crazy and all over the place as some of this stuff. But still, yeah, you can hear that Genesis sound on this album. Number 5, Nursery Cryme. Number 4 is 1976, Trick of the Tail, A Trick of the Tail. This is the first album post Gabriel, so you got Hackett still in there, Rutherford, Collins, Banks. And there's a lot of ballads on here, and the ballads that are on here would pretty much sort of set the tone for what most of the ballads would sound like for the rest of like the Phil Collins era. But what each of these ballads have, each of these ballads either has an utterly fascinating prog saturated ending or a weird little middle part where things get interesting and sort of like engage you after what is a pretty like just Phil Collins balladry skills is just I think they thought they were better than they were. But you have 3 central ballads, Entangled, which again, I think the first half is okay, but once you get to the second half, which just has this phenomenal sort of weird keyboard driven sort of prog spacey ending that cuts off and then goes right into Squonk. Great. Whoever put those back to back, excellent choice. You got Madman Moon, which again is kind of forgettable, but has a neat little part in the middle. And then Ripples, another ballad, which is again just kind of the same vibe as those other 2, but the ending, which kind of simulates Ripples musically, is just beautiful. And like just beautiful. So maybe if these had all been instrumentals and there had been no lyrics, they would be better songs. But apart from these ballads, you get Dance on a Volcano, which is like the most sort of King Crimson-y prog thing they've ever done. The ending of that is phenomenal. Live, when they did this live, they would eventually drop the really, really good, fascinating part and go right into Los Endos, which is kind of frustrating, but still. Squonk, a really great sort of weird prog rock, just straight ahead rock and roll number with just absolute great rhythm to it. Just dun-dun-dun, just great guitar, great rhythm. Really good song. Side 2, Robbery, Assault, and Battery, which is kind of a silly little song, but has a nice little prog middle, some interesting rhythm parts. A Trick of the Tail, sort of a poppy little throwaway number. And then Los Endos, which is an album closing instrumental that kind of references Dance on the Volcano and Squonk, kind of ties all those loose ends together and in a nice, the ends, like it takes the ends and ties them together, Los Endos. But it's a nice instrumental song to close out the album. It's a good album. It's a good listen. Like none of the songs are bad. The ballads maybe tend to run together, but they're each saved by something that I think elevates this above other stuff. And I really like Dance on the Volcano. I really like Squonk. I really like Los Endos. I think those are great, great songs. And I think this is just a little more of a consistent listen than like those early Peter Gabriel songs, which at times could be a little too English folk ballady, or at times just a little trying too hard, where this one, I think it's comfortable. They know what they're doing. They're taking some chances, but not too many. It's just a confident, sort of middle of the road prog album. Everything after this, the top 3 are great albums. And they're all Peter Gabriel albums. So on to number 3. Number three is 1972's Foxtrot, the album that contains, to my ears, the greatest progressive rock song ever made. Oop, the 23 minute Supper's Ready, which is essentially what, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven different songs just kind of cobbled together. Like, it really is a musical journey. It really is a cinematic journey. It really is this band doing everything at their absolute best over the course of 23 minutes. Everybody gets a chance to shine. It's fun, it's serious, it's scary at times, and the ending is absolutely one of the most beautiful endings to any song ever. And if the other songs on this album had been bad, this would probably make it pretty high up the list because Supper's Ready is such a phenomenal accomplishment. However, the other songs on this album are not bad. Watcher of the Skies, just this prog, Tony Banks, keyboard heavy, just saturated in just keyboards and this awesome little riff that slowly builds. Watcher of the Skies, little prog lyrical delivery, Peter being a little weird and off kilter. Just a phenomenal opener. And then Get 'Em Out by Friday of Timetable, which is kind of a little slower number, more like straightforward, typical number. Get 'Em Out by Friday, which is another just kind of upbeat, hyper, overly prog type long number. And then Can Utility at the Coastliners, which is kind of all over the place in the best prog way possible. And then Horizons, which is, I think, a Steve Hackett instrumental guitar, little beautiful little minute and 41-second piece that leads into the epicness that is Supper's Ready. Yeah, just a great listen that really has a little bit of everything on it, from like just prog at its keyboard saturated heaviness to prog at its weird lyrics, weird story, weird time signatures all over the place, with a couple things in between that are kind of walking the middle grounds between those, and then closing off with, I would argue, the greatest prog song ever written, Supper's Ready. Absolutely fantastic. Number three, Foxtrot. Number two, 1973, Selling England by the Pound. The only reason this is not number one is because number one exists. And out of the two near perfect albums that Genesis made, I think the other one is a little more interesting, but this is like almost a perfect album. Dancing with the Moonlit Night opens it up. One of those that has your typical Genesis song where we start off kind of ballady, and then we have like really heavy guitar part, and then we have an absolutely beautiful coda at the end, a little bit trippy, just kind of weird, obscure, not really sure what Peter Gabriel's talking about, but coherent lyrics. I Know What I Like. Great song on this album, fun little pop number. Live, the seconds out version of this song live, in which they really just kind of stretch it out and lay down that opening groove, and then they end by like quoting, like there's a stagnation quote at the end. I think they quote something off Wind of the Wuthering off the end. They're like quoting all these different things. Hackett's doing quotes, Banks is doing quotes. There's like a full-on stagnation jam at the end of that. That live version of I Know What I Like, you need to check that out if you haven't, off Seconds Out album. Firth the Fifth, beautiful piano work by Banks. We get a song, we get epic jams in the middle. We get a jam that just kind of builds and builds and builds and builds, a Steve Hackett guitar solo. More Fool Me, nice little ballady, acousticy number that Phil Collins sings. Battle of Epping Forest, one of your more proggy things on here. We have a bunch of different sort of musical sceneries that we kind of go through over the course of the song. One of the longer numbers on this album, the longest number on this album. Um, uh, there's a little part in this that I think goes on a little bit too long when he does this sort of talking part. I wish they had stayed more in that beginning part longer. But again, this is a pretty engaging song. After the Ordeal, another little instrumental that sets up the ending perfectly, which is the cinema show. Nice little slowly developing ballad, really good lyrics about like a couple dating, and then we get to that epic sort of jam at the end that they would then, you know, during their live performances, when they were doing In the Cage in like late 70s, early 80s, they would do In the Cage, and then they would do like a Riding the Scree little riff, and then that would go into the cinema show, usually into maybe Colony of Slipperman. Sometimes it went into the second part of Unquiet Slumbers. But yeah, no, that epic closing sort of Tony Banks solo with the drums and the bass and all that stuff is just like one of the best moments of Genesis. And then that goes into something called Isle of Plenty, which is this nice little fun little layering vocals type weird little ending. But yeah, man, only reason this is not number one is, and that is a 28-minute and 37-second side of music. So they were putting out some long albums back then. That's pretty sweet. But yeah, like this is a phenomenal album. The only reason it's not number one is because number one exists, and that is next. Number two, Selling England by the Pound. And number one, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Double album. Side one might be the most perfect side of music, other than Supper's Ready and Horizons, that Genesis has made. Is a concept album. Don't think that's important. You can still enjoy the album even if you don't follow the concept, because it's this guy, Rael, and he's in New York, and he ends up in the subways, and at one point he's in a cage. There's a colony of Slippermen, gets wrapped in a cocoon. All kinds of crazy stuff happens. But that doesn't matter. Whatever. The songs are great, whether or not you pay attention to the story. I've always thought that the song Looking for Someone off Trespass sounded like it could be on this album. There's a reference to the subway in that song, but just the overall vibe and energy of that song from their second album kind of fits in with this one. I think there's another song off Nursery Cryme that every time I hear, I'm like, oh, that could easily fit in on this album. So this is definitely within like the Genesis sound, and it's sort of culmination of everything they've done before, just in sort of shorter, smaller, segue into each other chunks. Side A is perfect. Lamb Lies Down on Broadway into Fly on a Windshield, which has one of the best prog instrumental sections ever. Just a mean sound and part, just heavy and really jammy and really good. Broadway Melody of 1974, some great lyrics. Cuckoo Cocoon, a beautiful song. In the Cage, one of their best. Closing out with the Grand Parade of Lifeless Packaging, which has a nice little ending. Side B, Back in New York City, which is kind of an upbeat, heavy song with some weird vocal effects by Gabriel. Hairless Heart, a little instrumental number. Counting Out Time, which is a nice little pop number about buying a book that tells you how to make a woman, like, get aroused. Carpet Crawl, which became sort of a hit, I guess. And then The Chamber of 32 Doors closes that out. Side 3, we're starting to get a little bit weird here. Lily White Lilith is just a great, aggressive, sort of proggy number. The Waiting Room, which is one of those like noise collages where you just have a bunch of random stuff kind of happening. It eventually goes into this like sort of kind of a more beautiful ending. Anyway, Here Comes the Supernatural Anesthesist, the Lamia, and then you got the nice Silent Sorrow and Empty Boats, which is the Lamia, just kind of floating away nice. It's a nice little instrumental to close out. This is a weird side, probably the weirdest side of music on this album. And then the phenomenal side 4, which balances out side 1, because side 4 is also probably not as perfect as side 1, but it's a pretty perfect side of music. You get The Colony of Slipperman, which is just a weird long song. Awesome solo in the middle that they would play, and In the Cage. You could hear that on Three Sides Live. Ravine, which is an instrumental. The Light Lies Down on Broadway, which has a lot of very recognizable melodies from The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, but they're either like tweaked a little, or they're extended, or they're shortened, but they're there. They're just reconfigured in enough ways that it kind of feels like a different song, but at the same time is an obvious callback to the beginning of the album. Riding the Scree, which has just some great instrumental energy. This is one of their greatest sort of, this is where like the instrumental part of them comes in the strongest. It's a really good jam. In the Rapids, and then the phenomenal It to close out, which is another great song, something they would start doing live. In the 80s, a Watcher of the Skies into It. But yeah, just an almost perfect album. And it's one of those where like, I probably spent the first many years only listening to the first disc because I thought the second disc was a little just not as engageable. But then once I started listening to the second disc, I realized the second disc has just as many highs as the first disc. And so it's one of those that over the years continues to sort of to reward frequent listens. Yeah, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, 1974, the last album with Peter Gabriel. And he wore costumes like crazy on this tour. There were some pretty cruddy videos out there, but you can see the kind of stuff that he wore, the costumes that he wore during this tour on YouTube and stuff. So check those out if you want. That is my ranking of my favorite Genesis albums. Yeah, that's about all I got to say about those. So let me know what I messed up on, what I'm wrong about, what albums I should re-listen to, and like maybe form a different opinion of if I can. Open my eyes and ears to stuff that I'm missing. Let me know what you think about this list. Yeah, you know how it works. You know how comments work, people. So comment, subscribe, like, share. Do whatever you want to do. It's a free, no, I'm not going to. I keep going down this path of like it's a free country, but you're not all in my country, and my country isn't even free anymore. So I'm going to stop saying that. But anyways, thanks for watching. I appreciate your time. And if you comment, I appreciate that in advance too. But thanks, and I will see you at the next video, which will be my top 10 favorite Genesis songs. We already know what number 1 is. I've given that away. But the rest will be a surprise. Peace, y'all. Talk to you later.